Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the story of Jesus healing the man born blind in John 9.141. It's one of those really well-known stories from the Gospels, but
Oh, yeah.
as always, we want to kind of dig a little deeper and see what's going on beneath the surface here.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things about this passage is it's not just about a physical healing, you know?
Mhm.
It really is about how we see the world literally and figuratively. And I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story opens with Jesus and his disciples, and they come across this man who's been blind since birth.
Mm.
And the disciples, being the disciples, they ask a question that honestly probably sounded pretty logical at the time. They ask Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned this man, or his parents, that he was born blind.
Mm.
It's almost like they're trying to find someone to blame for his suffering.
Yeah, it's so interesting that they would even ask that question, but it really does reflect this common belief um, that was prevalent at the time that suffering was like a direct punishment for sin. But I think it also reveals something about human nature that's still very relevant to us today. We
Yeah.
we often try to find a reason or a cause for suffering. We want to make sense of pain, and sometimes that leads us to look for fault.
Yeah, and it's almost like we have this deep-seated need to connect cause and effect, even when it comes to things that we can't fully understand.
Absolutely.
Like, especially when you're dealing with something like blindness from birth, it's just like, how do you explain that?
Right.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap of, well, somebody must have done something wrong.
Right. Someone's got to be to blame.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, to their question, Jesus kind of turns that whole line of thinking upside down. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So instead of focusing on blame, Jesus points to a higher purpose.
Yeah. It's really interesting how he kind of shifts the focus away from this idea of like, retribution or punishment for sin
Hmm.
to, okay, this is an opportunity for God to do something
Oh,
amazing.
right.
And that's where I think it really gets interesting because he doesn't just leave it at that. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't just say, hey guys, you've got it all wrong. This isn't about sin.
Yeah.
He actually goes on to heal the man. But even the method of healing is a little bit unusual.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
So he spits on the ground, he makes mud, with, puts it on the man's eyes,
Yeah.
and tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. So like what's with all the theatrics? Why not just,
Yeah.
snap his fingers and heal him instantly?
Yeah, I mean, think about it for a second. The Pool of Siloam isn't just some random location, right? The name Siloam actually means sent. And I think what John, the author of this gospel, is doing here is he's giving us a little hint. He's subtly reminding us that Jesus himself is the one sent by God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never actually made that connection before.
Yeah.
It's like there's this hidden layer of meaning just waiting to be discovered.
Yep.
So the man obeys Jesus, he washes in the pool, and boom, he can see.
This is amazing.
It's this incredible moment of transformation.
You could almost imagine the shock and awe of the people who knew him, as a blind beggar. Some are overjoyed, some are skeptical. It creates this buzz of excitement and disbelief.
Yeah, I mean, you can just imagine him like, running around telling everybody, I can see,
Yeah.
and people are like, wait, what? How is this possible?
Right.
So it's this amazing moment, but then here's where the conflict starts to kick in. The Pharisees, the religious leaders of the time, they enter the picture
Hmm.
and they are not happy.
Yeah, they're not pleased.
And part of that is because this whole thing happens on the Sabbath. So you got to remember that the Sabbath was a day of rest according to Jewish law.
Hmm.
And the Pharisees were very strict about observing the Sabbath. So to them, Jesus mixing mud and, performing this healing on the Sabbath was a clear violation of the law.
Yeah, I mean, to them, this was working. It was a clear violation.
Yeah, so it sets up this clash between the Pharisees' strict legalism and then this miracle that's just happened right in front of them.
It's hard to argue with a miracle.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah.
But they find a way. So they start interrogating the man. They drag his parents into it. They're demanding that the parents confirm his identity and whether he was really born blind.
Oh, man, talk about pressure.
You can just feel the tension in that scene.
You can sense the fear
Oh, yeah.
in the parents' responses, right? I mean, they know that confessing Jesus as the Messiah could get them kicked out of the synagogue. And that was a huge Annie deal back then. I mean, it meant being ostracized from your community, your family, your whole world.
Yeah, it's like you're basically cut off from everything you know. So they're caught between this rock and a hard place. They want to protect themselves, but they also, they can't deny the truth of their son's healing.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, what a dilemma. But then you've got the man who was blind. Now he can see. And he's not afraid to speak up at all, is he?
No, not at all. In fact, we see him becoming bolder and bolder in his testimony as the story unfolds. He's just this powerful example of someone whose physical sight leads to an even more profound spiritual awakening.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like he's seeing clearly for the first time in his life.
Mm,
And not just physically, but also spiritually.
right.
He's starting to understand who Jesus really is.
And he's not afraid to say it.
Exactly. And it's that boldness that's going to get him into some trouble. But we'll save that part of the story for our next deep dive.
Stay tuned. It's like his newfound physical sight gives him this clarity of thought and conviction that, those who claim to see just don't have.
It's really fascinating how this guy who was literally blind can see the truth about Jesus more clearly than these religious leaders who are supposed to be the experts.
Right. It's the irony that John is highlighting.
Yeah.
The Pharisees, with all their knowledge of the scriptures and tradition, they're blind to the reality of who Jesus is.
It is almost like they're so focused on the rules, on the outward appearances, that they miss what's actually important.
They miss the heart of it all. They
Yeah.
miss the point.
And they just can't let it go, can they?
No.
They keep interrogating this guy. They're trying to discredit Jesus, calling him a sinner. But the man's response is so simple and yet so profound. He says, "Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see."
I love that. He
Mm.
just cuts right through all their theological arguments with the undeniable truth of his own experience.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, you can debate all you want, but I lived this.
Right?
I was blind, and now I see. How can you explain that away?
Exactly.
And that's what's so compelling about his story. He's not a theologian or a scholar. He's just a regular guy who
Yeah.
encountered Jesus and whose life has been completely transformed.
hmm
And his testimony is just so raw and honest and ultimately unassailable.
His words really highlight that contrast between intellectual knowledge and lived experience. The Pharisees, with all their learning, are trapped in their own blindness. They can't see the truth that's right in front of them.
And that blindness leads them to reject the very person who could offer them true sight. They end up kicking this guy out of the synagogue.
Yeah, it's tragic.
Imagine being cast out of your community, your place of worship, for simply stating what you know to be true.
Yeah, what a consequence for just telling the truth.
It really shows how clinging to this limited view of the world can lead to isolation and rejection.
And division.
But in the midst of all this darkness, we see a glimmer of hope. Jesus doesn't abandon this man. He seeks him out
Oh, this is so beautiful.
and has this incredible personal encounter with him.
It's a beautiful picture of God's relentless love. God is pursuing those who are hurting and marginalized. And even when we're rejected by the world, we're never abandoned by God.
That's such an encouraging thought.
It really is.
And in this encounter, Jesus reveals himself to the man as the Son of God. It's like his spiritual sight catches up to his physical sight. He finally sees Jesus for who he truly is.
And he worships him.
Yeah.
It's a moment of profound transformation. He goes from being a blind beggar to a follower of Jesus, a recipient of God's grace and mercy.
I mean, it all starts with this simple act of obedience.
Washing in the pool of Siloam.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's a powerful reminder that sometimes the path to spiritual sight begins with taking a step of faith, even if it seems strange or illogical at first.
Yeah.
But then Jesus throws another curveball. He starts talking about judgment. He says, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind." Because what's going on here?
Yeah, it sounds like a paradox.
Yeah.
But Jesus is talking about a different kind of judgment, this spiritual discernment that goes beyond outward appearances.
So it's not like a, you're going to hell kind of judgment.
Right.
It's something deeper.
It's a deeper judgment. He's saying that his coming into the world will expose the true condition of people's hearts.
So like their true motivations and intentions.
He's-
So it's like he's saying that those who are humble and open to God, like the man born blind, they will be given spiritual sight. But those who are proud and self-righteous, like the Pharisees, they will be blinded by their own arrogance.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a warning against spiritual complacency.
A powerful warning.
Like, just because we think we see doesn't mean we actually do.
Right.
Wow.
True sight comes from being open to God's truth, even
Yeah.
if it challenges our preconceived notions.
It makes you wonder, what are the areas in our own lives where we might be clinging to a limited view?
Yeah, where are our blind spots?
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in, our own little world, in what we think we know,
Absolutely.
and miss the bigger picture.
That's the danger of spiritual blindness, right? It's not just about like not believing in God. It's about being unable to see the truth of God's love and grace at work in the world, even when it's right in front of you.
And you know what really strikes me about the blind man in this story is his willingness to be wrong, to have his mind changed. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Yeah, he's humble.
Yeah, he's honest about what he doesn't know, but he's eager to learn and grow.
That humility, I think, is key to spiritual sight. When we're willing to admit we don't have it all figured out, when we're open to new possibilities, that's when we can truly begin to see the world and God in fresh, transformative ways.
It's like his physical healing opened his eyes not only to the world around him, but to this deeper reality. And even when he's rejected by his community, his faith doesn't waver. He clings to what he knows to be true.
To that experience he had with Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what's so inspiring about this story. It's a reminder that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about being open to the journey, to letting God surprise us, challenge us, and ultimately transform us.
So if we're going to apply this story to our own lives, where do we even begin?
That's a great question. I think it starts with asking ourselves some tough questions. What are the areas in our lives where we might be resistant to seeing things differently? Where are we clinging to our own limited perspectives? What are our blind spots?
Yeah, maybe it's in our relationships or our political views, or even our understanding of faith itself. Maybe we've built walls around our hearts, and we're afraid to let anyone, even God, challenge our assumptions.
The invitation in this story is to be like the blind man, to be willing to let go of our preconceived notions, to step out in faith, and to allow God to open our eyes to a new way of seeing.
And sometimes that new way of seeing might lead us to uncomfortable places. Like the blind man, we might face rejection or persecution for standing up for what we believe in.
But even in those difficult moments, we can find solace in knowing that we're not alone. Jesus sought out the man who was cast out. He offers that same love and acceptance to each of us, no matter what we've done or where we've been.
That's such a powerful image of God's grace. It's not about earning our way in. It's about recognizing our need for healing, for
Mhm.
sight, for a deeper connection with the one who sees us fully and loves us unconditionally.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into John 9.
Yeah.
As always, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for joining me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you've been challenged and encouraged to see the world and yourselves in a new light. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.